So this is the blackberry spread we're going to make. And we're going to make the center for the blackberry first. You can either use your 24 gauge wire or your 26 gauge wire. And we're going to need 3, either half or third lengths. It doesn't matter if it's only a third length, but we're going to use 3, either 24 or 26 gauge wire. And we're going to tape those down. So I think everyone's done flowers before, and you're most welcome to join and do as we go along. And that'll just give you a bit more time for the complicated bits. So we're just going to level the 3 wires off and just some way down the wire, turn the tape at a bit of an angle. This is the Nile green tape. Flip over, pinch it tightly and give it 1 or 2 twiddles, but so that it's still loose enough to push up the wire. And then we can tape all the way down. Okay, so you don't necessarily need a half length wire for this, but I'm not going to trim it because by trimming it again, it's then too small. And we're going to put a hook in the end that's about 1/2 centimetre in length. Have it a little bit closed up, and that's what's going to be embedded into the centre of your blackberry. And you need to make 2 so that we've got, at the end, we've got 2 blackberries. So all I've done to make the centre is to set up my candle, 1 centimetre ball of paste, roll it into a crack-free ball, put the hooked end of the wire into the flame, get it so it starts to burn, and as it travels up the stem, blow out and immediately push the hooked end of the wire into the ball to about 3/4 of the way. Take a pair of angled tweezers just to close up, and then just press it between your finger and thumb so that you get a bit of an oval shape. Now these, once you've made them, can go into the oven. You could just sit them on one of the racks and let the head kind of hang through the rack so you don't flatten it. And they'll just stay in the oven. If you turn the oven off, if it's hot, if it's a fan oven, turn the oven off at this point, keep the door shut, and that should be enough just to harden these off so that we can actually handle them later and attach the berries without everything kind of crushing. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to put mine into the oven now. So while our centers are drying, I'm going to get you to make this piece here, which is the stamen center. It's made with cotton. And we want to put a pointing finger and a middle finger together and just leave a little bit of a gap between. Just rest the cotton over your fingers where the first knuckle is, where the first bend is, and wrap around. Try and keep your fingers slightly parted because otherwise it can make it feel a bit uncomfortable and also quite difficult to get the cotton off. And we want to wrap this around your finger about 15 times. And when you feel like you've got enough string on your fingers, you can cut off. Pull that off your finger to reveal a nice big loop. And then we're going to make this into 2 loops by twisting in the center. It looks like a figure of 8. And then taking that figure of 8, we're going to fold 1 smaller loop over the other loop. And then push the 28 gauge wire through so that you've got the loop in the center. Close the wires up like a hair grip. And then twist tight like a sandwich tag. Maybe 6 times, 5, 6 times here. Now, we need to tape this so that when we cut through all the threads, that it doesn't unravel itself. So I'm just taking a piece of tape, give it a good stretch so it's tacky. Scoop all of the cotton to one side. Rest the tape so that half of the width of the tape is resting on the base of the cotton and the other half is resting on the wire. And by hook or by crook, we turn over the tab to make it stick. And you should find that you've got about 2-3 mil of cotton secured under that tape. And then you can tape all the way down the wire. Now, it is really important that up the top here, from there to there is cotton underneath. So you've still got a decent length, but we've incorporated the cotton under here. And then from here down, it's just wire. Once you've done that, you can find any kind of tool. It could be a pair of scissors, just to go into both of those loops and give it a little tug so you know that all your cotton is nice and even. And then using your sharp small scissors, you can run the blade through the center there and snip to open everything up. Run your blade through a couple of times just to make sure that all the loops have been cut open. And then if we draw all of those fronds of cotton so that it's flat, looks a bit like a witch's broomstick at this stage. And my thumb now I'm going to use as a cutting guide. So I'm going to run it almost up to the top like this. And then bring in a pot just to help you a little bit with all the offcuts. We're going to give it a trim using your thumb now as a bit of a cutting guide. And then we'll just give it a little fluff up using your finger. Just to open it all up. And we only need one of these. So we need to put a little bit of texture or pollen onto the tip ends of the blackberries. And when you look at them, they really have got that on there. It's not all over, it's just kind of lightly attached. So we fluffed up our little piece of cotton. You can actually, if you wanted to, you could run a emery board across this, and that will fluff it up a little bit more if you feel you need to. Just make sure you've definitely cut through all the loops and you've got this into how you want it really before you start to glue. If you find that lots of the fronds have attached together, then you can just kind of run your cocktail stick through and that will open it up. Get it into something that resembles what you want it to be like, nice and rounded, fairly evenly spaced. The pollen I've got here is just a mix of ground rice and semolina. I'm just going to undo the lid, but it can actually leave gritty bits on my surface. So I'm just opening that over something. So you can make this kind of a mossy, browny green just by adding your green and the red petal dust together. Just use maybe 1/3 teaspoon of ground rice or semolina. And if you prefer, you don't need to do this. You can just leave it plain. All I've done is put the colour into that quantity, close the lid up, give it a good old shake, and it's come out like this. And mine's kind of a mossy browny green shade. If it's too green and it's not brown enough, add more red. If it's too red, add more green. Okay, so I'm just now dabbing my sugar glue onto the tips of the threads so that the pollen will stick. So I have one go at this. Try not to put the glue on too thickly. You don't want to end up with kind of globules of pollen. And then having put enough glue onto the tip ends of the threads, I can turn it upside down and place those tips into my pollen. Again, it doesn't need to go all the way down because the stamens, the sides are still going to be kind of creamy white shade. When that comes out of the pollen, you've got something that looks like this. And if you feel like too many of the fronds have attached together, just take a cocktail stick and run it through the side and up so that you can open up the threads a little bit more. So here I've got quite a lot of pollen in one place, but if I just push in and draw up, I should end up with something that looks quite nice. And you don't really notice this detail on the flower, but when you look, you'll realize that it has actually got just black dots on the top, or browny black dots. So the blossom itself, there's quite a few stages to it. So if you haven't made it before, or even if you have, this will be a refresher. But it's good to watch the whole process through, unless you're watching the video, in which case it's fine. But I have to show you from start to finish, otherwise it'll dry. And I find often when you first make these, they come out a bit too big. And then after a couple of goes, you'll find that you'll be able to scale the size right down and become quite quick at making these. So the ball is about 1 centimetre diameter. I want a little bit of corn flour. So I have got my puffer in on the side here, just on my fingers. And the first thing I want to do is actually pinch out a point. So I'm making a cone. And then with the tool, we're not going to use the 6-sided, which is this pure pointed. We're going to use the 5-sided, where it kind of starts to taper in a diagonal. A little bit of corn flour on the tool so it doesn't stick in your paste. And then find the center of the fat end, push in and press a little bit, not too hard, but you just want to press so the impression is made with the tool. And I've gone into about 3/4 of the way, or probably more there. So easily a centimetre, centimetre and a half. Depends how big you want the petals to be. The deeper you go, the bigger your petals will become, or the longer your petals will become. So when you pull that off the tool, you've got this star pattern, and we're going to use that as a guide to where we're going to snip with the scissors. And the scissors are going to snip about halfway on the cone. I like to make sure that my blade is straight, because if it's at an angle, sometimes you don't cut the petals straight and then there'll be different sizes, which doesn't matter, but ideally keep your scissors straight. So I've got them in front of me and I'm actually turning the marked paste rather than the scissors. And then we're going to pull out. Now, each stage of this flower, you could use it. It just depends on what you're trying to make. So a really quick flower for dropping onto a cupcake, you could just use it like this. To start with, I'm going to have my finger and thumb sideways and just press on to these little pointed edges so that they round off. And then putting a bit more corn flour on my fingers, I'm going to turn it so that my hands are this way round. So the fingers are kind of horizontal, because we're going to flatten each petal. So we're just going to take the petal in your finger and thumb and press. Try not to pull at the same time. You don't need to go right to the middle. You could leave maybe 2 millimeters unpressed in the center. So your flower could stop there if you wanted to as well. But we're going to take it a few stages further. The first thing I need to do is actually take my cocktail stick and my big scissors and cut off a small amount of the tapered pointed end. It's only a small amount. You've still got the bit where it's the full fat, and then you've got the bit that's from about where my nail is here, that's starting to narrow, but we haven't got the super pointed end. So that's the first prep. And then we need to dust your knuckle, the first bend in your pointing finger, if you like. And I'm left-handed, so if you're right-handed, your flower and the dusting needs to be on your left hand. So we're going to push that, place that onto my knuckle and make it so that one petal rests over the bendy part. It's because that's where your bone is. A little bit of corn flour, so I'm just twisting the tool into the corn flour. Holding the back of the flour, we're going to make contact with the paste right on the edge here. Okay, I'm just going to take things out of the way so it refocuses. It tries to focus on too many things. So hopefully that's a bit clearer. So my cocktail stick is held at an angle pointing to the corner of the room, corner of the ceiling. And then you draw from halfway to one side and halfway to the other side, and that will thin the petal edge and broaden the petal. You don't have to go too far in. I've probably only worked on that part of the flower. Peel that off carefully because sometimes it can tear. And this is why you need the corn flour. Don't worry if it tears, because in real life they are so fine, these petals, that it's no surprise the wind just shreds them. So I'm going to keep that as my detail. So we're going back in, resting the fattest part of the cocktail stick onto the edge of the petal in the center. Draw one side, then the other, and go again if you want to, but just bear in mind that the more times you press, the more likely it is to completely stick to your finger. And these are definitely doing that tonight. As you were saying earlier, Amina, the moisture in the air, it is quite humid. So drawing left, drawing right, remove from your finger, a bit more corn flour. Do the same again. Carefully peel. These two happened when I rolled a second time, so maybe just try and get it rolled once to the left and once to the right. Because the minute you make that super thin, it rips, as you can see. So once you've created the thin petal edge, you can take your tool the same side as you pressed in before, line up the point with the center, but this time the ridge will be lined up with the middle of each petal. So that way, when we press with our finger at the back, we can take advantage of that ridge and mark in some extra detail to the petal. Make sure that this has got corn flour on it, otherwise it's going to stick. Can you see we've got like little dotty little lines now in the center? So one last process before we can attach the stamens, and that is to put your flower down onto the board. Now, if you want to, you can put it in one of the holes, but personally, I prefer to lay it on its side. And with the bone modeling tool, let's just change angle so you can see. So with the bone modeling tool, I'm using the large end, but unusually having it face down. And I'm going to go into the center there and press down so that we cup it, but also wrinkle the outside. So you can probably get one, maybe two petals done in that way, and then you'll need to turn the flower. So this cupping gives you more detail, but it also wrinkles the edges a little bit, which it makes it look quite authentic. I'm going to change back to camera because this one's a bit glary with the lighting. So now we've got our flower, and it's time to put the center in. Which I've got here. So we start by feeding the end of the wire through the center at the front. And then I'm going to try and aim to pierce that through the center at the back. Pull it through a little way, and then we're going to put some glue where you've got that knobbly part, which is where the tape is incorporating the thread as well. So we're just going to put a little bit of glue around there and pull that through. Now, as the fatter part makes contact with the paste, it can cause a bit of stress. So if you twiddle it as it comes through, because you want to make sure that that's properly in. You don't want to see any tape from the top side, from the front side. The last bit is to just press to neaten the stem. They haven't got a huge amount of back to them, so if you want to, you can use your nails just to mark and cut through the excess stem and then neaten back off again. Okay, now if you're not happy with the shredded bits, I mean, some of this looks a bit over the top, so I'm just going to actually trim. I'm going to keep that one because it looks natural. But just make sure that when you're using the cocktail stick that the edges don't combine together, so you do have separate petals. So to attach the berries to your centers that you've made, we need to make up a little bit of super glue that's edible. Okay, I'm actually going to use the lid for this because I want my berries to go in here. So maybe the edge of your board or a saucer, something like that will work. I'm going to mash it on here. But it doesn't take a lot of glue to make this into something that you can work with. This is just sugar flour paste, about 1 centimetre ball. Be enough to do 2 or 3 berries. And then I'm just going to paint on some glue, which is probably equivalent of about 2 drops. And then use my palette knife or knife, or a back of a spoon, whatever you think you can work with. And we're going to start to mash that sugar flour paste into something that we can spread onto the center that we've made. Now, you want this, it's very difficult because it needs to be not too wet and not too firm. It just needs to be right. But you'll soon work it out. If you find that you put too much liquid on it, then once you've spread this paste onto your center, you can leave it to soak in and dry off a little bit. If it's too firm, then your berries simply won't stick, so you'll know. And then what you could do is paint glue onto it and leave it for 5 minutes. Once you've gunged it, paint glue over, and that will soak into the gunge and it should be okay then as well. Okay, but what we're looking for is something that does that. Okay, so it's not too wet, it's super stretchy and you can feel the knife resistance. It's holding the knife down. Okay, so that's what you're after, nothing any wetter than that. And we're going to portion that onto our knife, and you want to make sure you coat the whole ball with about a minimum of 1 millimeter, so probably even 2 mil thick. It's not super thick, but it's definitely not thinly spread. We want to make sure you go all the way over and under here. So wherever you want the berries to attach, you need to have the glue. If you've got any ball patches, the sugar pearls will not stick. And you might find when you come to do your second one that the paste is dried out a little bit because it's very quick drying. So you can just add a little bit more water, just a touch. So I'm just making sure I've got a minimum of 1 millimeter thickness all the way around and there's no gaps. Okay. And I'll just balance that on there for a moment. my berries are not very well stored. They're just in a plastic bag. And I'm going to decant some of those berries into my pot. The ones you don't use, you can always pour back into the storage container. But you need enough to be able to press down in. Now, the idea is we're going to get a pearl stuck on everywhere, all the way around. There's no pearls on top of pearls. It's just whatever attaches to the center that you've prepared. And then as you push this in, press down the head to pick up the pearls, and then start to turn it round to attach more pearls. Okay, now at the moment my gut is telling me that this paste might be a little bit on the stiff side, a little bit on the dry side, but I'll be able to tell if I've got enough on, because the balls, or if it's too dry, the balls simply won't stick. So I want to go again. Okay, it's telling me it's a little bit on the wet side, on the dry side. Now, if you've got this consistency right, you should only have a few gaps, and those gaps can be filled manually just by adding your beads on. In the past, the way this was done was by making sugar pearls out of flour paste, and you'd probably need about 50 per blackberry. So to know you can use these sugar pearls, having pre-made the center, if you're not putting your center in the oven as well, it's good to dry them overnight. I probably wouldn't, if I haven't put this in the oven, what I would want to do is leave it on the side for about 12 hours minimum. This is dry. So the only thing I can do here now is wet the areas that won't stick. And give that possibly 2 or 3 minutes before I go ahead and try and attach any more berries. Okay. If your green paste is darker, it won't show through as much as this. This needs to be more closed up. I'll adjust it in a minute. But the idea is you will end up with a blackberry. This is the one I made this morning, completely coated. All right. So I've got just a bit of my dark green paste. I'm probably using about 1.5 centimeters to roll out and cut a large leaf. If you've got different sizes, then often the sprig of rose leaves will grow with the biggest one at the head, at the end, and then they gradually get smaller in pairs as you work down the stem. And for cake decorating, we normally maybe make sprigs of 3, which is what we've got here, or 5, but we don't normally go to 7 or 9 because they disappear underneath the arrangement. So probably 5 would be the maximum. So you can make yours out of the same size cutter or use a variation. I've made mine as 3 big ones because it makes a bigger spray. So just take your ball of paste, roll it into an oblong shape, and drop that sideways onto your board. Now, if your board is likely to make the paste stick, just put some corn flour on there so you can handle the paste. So press that on, and initially we're going to roll the paste a little bit sideways so that we know we've got the width of the leaf. And then we can roll across or along the ridge. Paste just slid a little bit there, but we want to make sure that this is nice and thin. And then when you've rolled it out, carefully release. It's probably better from the bottom to peel it off. So even though I put that corn flour on, because my paste is a bit sticky, it's actually torn a little bit, and I had a bit of difficulty getting that off. So corn flour is good. This bottom end here is where the wire is going to be inserted. So we're going to line that up with the fattest end that's just come off the bottom of the board. Make sure you give it a good cut, pull the excess around, and this can be reused. So we're just going to put that under cover. I've got a little pot here. And then run your finger along the edge. And just use something to push out if you've got one of these that's not completely cut through. The wire we're going to use is a 28 gauge, and that would be third cut. And just make sure that your wire is nice and straight. This is the fattest end, which is the bottom end. It's the bit we cut with the base of the leaf here. This pointed end here is the tip, and that's going to be the end of the leaf. Apply a bit of pinching pressure, top and bottom. Excuse the dirt on my hands, that really is, it's the green that I've just coloured with. And then we feed the straight end of the wire. Just make sure it is straight, because if it's not, it can end up tearing. So pick the nicer side. So applying a bit of pinching pressure between my finger and thumb here as we feed the wire through. The idea is to keep that wire in the center of the ridge. And we're going to feed it through until about 2 or 3 mils from the end. Now this is showing just a little bit here, but rather than stop, I can just close that up a little bit with my tweezers. We'll cheat. The ridge side, that's going to make the back, and this side is nice and clean. There's no wire showing through. That's going to be the front. On the veinner itself, you've got the initials GR in the middle, standing for Garden Rose. The raised part on the right-hand side will be the front of the leaf. The recessed part on the left-hand side will be for the back. So knowing that we don't like the ridge and that wants to be at the back of the leaf, we're going to put the ridge face down on the left-hand side. Just make sure, if you feel the need, put some corn flour in there just so that your leaf doesn't stick. So ridge face down, left-hand side, line it up in the central ridge, and then press it as if you're closing a book and open up again. Just try not to wiggle it. Release the pressure to reveal the texture on your leaf. We've then got to thin the edges. So I'm just going to use the bone modeling tool to draw right down the edge. My tool is this way round now. I'm pressing this part onto the leaf here, and it's halfway on the leaf and halfway on the foam pad. So you're pinching the edge. If you're too far on, you'll end up losing your vein and creating a cup. So just on the edge. And then to finish off, we're going to put a little twist of tape. And we can start down here somewhere. Push up and then just tape it so that you've got about an inch strip of green. And this just needs a little close up at the base, just a little bit. Give it a little tilt backwards and a slight bit of movement towards the tip. Rose leaves don't have much movement in them. Well, some do, but this one doesn't. So if your berries need shining up, you can use edible varnish, which is confectioner's glaze. This is 100% glaze, but you need to be careful because this stuff is not very kind to surfaces or clothing. And the only way you can really get it off would be to use isopropyl, which is the dipping solution that you can buy. That's just very high grade alcohol. The surprising thing with this is it's completely edible, but you can buy the dipping solution, which is virtually 100% alcohol for about £3.50, but if you drink that, you'll end up in hospital. And the same goes for this. So, but I prefer to work with it. This is not varnish, but I would prefer to work with it in a bottle with a brush, because you want to treat it like nail varnish. Otherwise, your brush, whatever you use, is going to need cleaning in the isopropyl. A bit like white spirit required for oil-based paints. Okay, so that's one thing you can use to glaze things like your berries, snowberries, hollyberries, rose hips, anything that wants to be shiny. Or you could actually buy a spray can of clear varnish, and this one isn't actually, this is edible luster spray, but it comes in a can like this, which you can shake and spray that outdoors, though you don't want it on your surface again. Or you've got the, I think it's cocoa, it's like chocolate, it's glaze varnish for chocolate, but you can use that as well. Okay. I wouldn't recommend using clear varnish, nail varnish, unless you're not giving that to someone to put on a cake, or if someone's not going to eat it. So if it's ornamental and it's not going on food, then you could use clear nail varnish on there at a push. And there's very little colouring on here. We've literally just got the moss green on the leaves, because there's not a lot of tonal difference. And then I've caught the edges with red, which looks quite nice and autumnal. And I've caught the backs of the flowers with red. So there's quite a minimal amount of colouring involved in this. So I'll just move the flower. Just make sure your tools are out of the way so that you don't have to go ahead and wash. I'm using the petal dusts, so I'll just move those. And support the back of the leaf, because it's even if it was dry, you'd want to do the same. It's a bit wet, so just be a bit delicate with your colouring. And of course, mostly what this is going to do is take off the cornflower. So I've just loaded up the brush with a decent amount of moss green, and then I'm just running the brush up the centre, and then just kind of work the colour in. And it's always a good idea to do a little something on the back as well. Okay, so it's not really going to change the leaf colour, but it does add a little something. You can also, once you've finished with the arrangement, once it's all together, you can actually steam, and that will hold, it will kind of melt the paste a little bit, and then as it sets, it holds the colour. So if you've got loose colour on there that you don't want to transfer onto a cake, but you can see the difference. Okay, and I've just got a separate brush here, but once you've done the green, you can actually change your brush, your paint brush, or clean your brush, and just catch a little bit of the red from the edge inwards. Okay, don't necessarily need to do anything on the back, but it is quite nice to have a bit of difference, a bit of depth. And using the same red, I'm going to just work that into the brush a little bit more, and then catch the outside edge, drawing down the back of the petal. And that gives you a little blush, which you can see from the front, and then it's also drawing down the back to make it a bit more interesting. The other option is pink. You could use the plum petal dust, and that would look quite nice as well. Often the blackberry blossoms are all just white, others do have a pink tinge at the back. And that will give you just a bit of interest to the flower. The blackberries we don't need to do anything with. If they weren't black, you'd need to buy matte ones, and then you could dust these with the black petal dust once they're dry. So all the while this glaze is wet, you don't really want to touch it. Not the glaze, the glue is wet. We leave that to dry overnight. And we'll start with the leaves, okay? So just giving a strip of tape a good stretch. And with the leaves, you can pick one leaf to be bent to the left and another leaf to be bent to the right. Just use your tweezers to do this, and you've got probably about 1/2 centimetre of stem before the bend, which is unusual. Most leaves go in tight, but not with the rose. Then position the 2 side leaves so they are going to be taped in directly opposite. I normally try and have this stem, the main stem, behind, and then these 2 are sitting together on top. I might just release the pressure a little bit and just push that down a fraction. It depends how you want it, really. I think that looks quite nice. So what you've got is a head and 2 arms. Give them a little pinch where the bend is on the leaf, and then you can tape in tight straight away. So we'll just fold over the flap of tape. Remember that the tape only sticks to itself, but it will stick to the wire in this case because they are taped. That makes it a bit easier. And the reason you pre-tape is so that you don't actually see any of the white wire. So we can tape all the way down the stem and then just adjust. Okay. And then the next step is to put your blossom together with your berries. So it's quite nice, I think, to have your blossom on first, and then we can attach the berries slightly lower down, but more of staggered in a little way so that they're not the same level. It's also quite nice if we can make the stem look a bit more curved, so then it just looks natural. We can curve the other one the other way. So take your blossom, position one berry slightly lower down, start to tape around, and then position the other berry slightly lower down again still, but you're still going to be taping at the same area. If you lose berries at this stage, just be gentle with your taping in, but if they drop off, you can stick them on once you've got everything in the spray. Just make up a little bit more or wet down your gunge that you've got left over, and use that, apply it to the pip itself, and get that attached. Okay, and then to finish off, you can position the berries and the flower so that the flower rests possibly about halfway up the leaf. Give that a little press, and we're going to attach about here. So nothing goes in too tight. We want to have it feel natural and free-flowing rather than really tightly packed in. And you can use your nail just to press into those grooves so that it neatens the taping for you. When you get to the point where your stem is starting to thin, that's where you can trim off. So I like to take my wire cutters or a sharp pair of scissors, mind your fingers obviously, and just cut that at an angle, and then use a piece of tape just to cover up the exposed wires at the base of the stem. Oops, I'll just break that off. So that is your sprig. So to get the little caterpillar holes, I'm going to use a thick needle heated up by candle. So just put the tip of the needle into the flame and just be aware it might get a bit hot on the handle end. If you've got a pair of pliers, you can always hold it with that. So we're going to get that quite hot. And then if you just find the spot where you want to plunge and push the hot needle through the leaf, you might want to support it on the back. Give it a little wiggle and come back out again. Makes a hole. So we'll go back in then and just be aware the hotter, this will get hotter, especially if you've got the molten sugar on there as well. So just watch out what you're doing, because you don't want to hurt yourself. And just catch an edge. Go again. So each time you need to heat, you could use a gas flame for this, but your candle should be adequate. And you don't have to do this if you don't like it, but I like the fact that this is looking very natural. And also that when you do it, you get this black edge, which is the caramelized sugar that's burnt its way through. You don't have to do them all. And it's not just rose leaves that would have this on. Just make sure your finger's not behind it. Okay, and that gives you your little caterpillar holes. And that is your little arrangement of blackberries, blossom, and foliage. So if you want to, you can actually steam the arrangement once it's complete. Just lost a berry. But you're probably better off just steaming the leaves on this one so that you don't make the berries dull or damage your blossom. And that will set the colour and give yourself more natural look to the leaf, and it'll go a little bit shiny, but that will go. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed your lesson today, and if you want to join in, you've got the kit list, which is just being shared now, and also that says rose leaf veiner on there. Let's just make that a bit smaller so you can see it. So that's the kit list for joining, and if you've got any questions, feel free to email me at hannah@inspiredcreations.uk.com, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye bye for now.